So I'm going to show you how to make an accordion book that looks similar to this one. So it has a cover, and then you can open it up and flip through the pages. So I'm going to tell you the materials that I'm using, but also give you some ideas to change and switch things up for yourself. So this example that I just showed you, this one has watercolor paper on the inside, and the cover is made with Bristol board. The one that I'm going to be doing in this demonstration, I'm using Bristol board, and I'm also going to use Bristol board for the cover. So part of that is because I'm working on a series of making books and just using materials that I already have in my house. If you don't already have materials, you could go and pick whatever kind of paper you really want to have inside of a journal. I think the Bristol board works really well for making the cover. So the size is also totally up to you, but I will go over the sizes that I'm using in case you want to just follow along and do the same thing. So the paper that I'm starting with is 9.5 by 12, and I'm going to be folding these in half and cutting them in half. So it's going to be similar to this book. This book is 6 by 4.5. I'm going to make my pages longer than they are tall. That is really just a personal preference. So the way that I'm go about doing this, you could use a paper cutter. If you wanted to, you could use an X-Acto knife if you wanted to. That, again, is up to you. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just creasing my paper. Since this is Bristol board and a little bit heavier, I'm going to do it on both sides. I like what a ripped edge looks like, so I'm going to go ahead and fold all of mine and rip them in half. So then that will make my pages, the half sheet is turning into just a little over 4.5 by 12. So that's the first step you're going to want to do, is pick out your paper and prepare your pages. You can also have as many pages in your book as you want to. So once you have all of your pages broken down to whatever size you decided they're going to be, now we're going to start to fold them in half and prepare them to turn them into the accordion that we'll be putting in our book. So if you have it, a lot of bookmakers are going to recommend that you have what's called a bone folder, and bone folders do several things. One of the main things is they help you to have a really nice tight crease in your fold. However, if you don't have a bone folder, that shouldn't hold you back from making a book. I actually don't have one here at home, so there are other things that you can use that I think work just as well. If you take a pencil, you can rub that over the edge. You can also take, if you have a ruler, you can take a ruler and run that over the edge, and that's going to help flatten yours out. The other thing that I do is I'll fold them, and then I actually have this like really old iron. That was my grandmother's. I fold them and then I sit the stack under my iron, and that also really helps to flatten out the creases. So I personally am going to do this whole pile. I don't know that I'm going to put this whole pile in one book, but I'm making a whole series of books, so I'm going to turn all of these into an accordion book. It may be more than one book, so I'm going to go ahead and prep all of the pages because that's how I like to work. So once you have your stack, you are ready for the next step. So I'm going to set my stack aside for the moment and put my iron on top and pull this finished one to look at. So now we have all of the folios, but we need to attach them so it becomes an accordion. So in this book, it's a little bit hard to see because they're still white. So there's a strip of paper that's going over each edge. Let me see if I bring it closer. No, you still can't really see that. And that is connecting each one of the folios. So when I'm doing it, I am using this white strip of paper. It's a little bit heavier weight. Again, really the reason I'm using this is I got a lot of strips of paper from a local typography artist. So these are kind of like trimmings of posters and projects like that. And I'm trying to do all of my bookmaking using things that I already have in my studio. So you could use any type of paper as the strip. You can try and match it to the color of your paper, or you could also use a totally different color and have it be something that's more decorative. You could use something like washi tape if you wanted to, or anything like that. We just need to link the folios together. So what I need to do, since I'm not using tape, but I'm using these strips of paper, is I need to cut the strips down. So the strip, you need lengths that are the same length as your page. So I'm going to grab my ruler, measure my page, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and make a ton of these strips. So if you're doing it how I am, you're going to start to measure and make your strips. If you're deciding that you're using something like tape that you don't have to measure, you'll be able to just skip over this part and fly on to the next step. Okay, so as you saw before, I tend to like to rip things. So for this, I use my metal ruler. Just lay it down on the line I measured. This one is not the right size, so I'm going to throw it to the side. But you can just lay it down on that line. As long as you hold it nice and tight, you should just be able to rip. Obviously, you can use scissors if you want to. If you have a paper cutter, you can use a paper cutter. Make sure that's the same. Now, I could either continue to use my ruler and measure, or I can just use one of these as a little template. Again, both options work totally fine. So you want to think about whatever's easiest for you. If you're doing this with your kids or with your students, think about what works best for them. pile of these. If you really like to plan, you could obviously count out how many pages you're doing and how many connectors that you need. I tend to just kind of make a bunch and go with it. So once we have all of these, now they need to be folded in half so that they're ready to connect our 2 pages. So I take these and because this is a little thicker paper, a little bit more like Bristol board, it takes a little bit more to fold. So I fold, and if you have a bone folder, this is where you would use that. If you don't have a bone folder, you can join me in using something like your pencil or your ruler. So I think whenever we're creating, it's good to know about the correct tools that are used within the profession and knowing how to use them. But I also think it's really important to understand that you can kind of improvise and use other things and not keep lack of access to those type of tools, not have that keep you from doing something. One thing that you might want to test, and again, this is whether it bothers you or not. So I know you probably can't quite see it. My pencil, when I rub, every once in a while, my pencil leaves like a little bit of that orange color on the crease. I'm totally fine with that and sort of like how that looks. If that is something that bothers you, if you would use like a pen like this, just use something else that doesn't actually rub off, but you might want to, that's something to watch out for if you're using a different type of tool to help with your crease.
If you were doing this in class, so you're doing it with like a couple kids at home, you could also turn this into kind of a little bit of a production line or assembly line. So some people could be working on cutting and folding their folios, and some people could be working on cutting and folding, excuse me, cutting and folding folios. That could be a way to kind of turn this into a bit of a team effort, if that's something that you want to try.
Bunch of these folded, so now we're ready to start to do some gluing. This is where you can also choose what kind of glue you want to use. I'm going to show you what I'm using in a second. You could try and use a glue stick, but I think glue sticks don't tend to quite hold well enough for something like this, especially because I'm using a little bit of a heavier weight paper. You could use rubber cement. If you're really into bookmaking, there is like book binding glue. It tends to be really helpful in, especially for thinner papers, keeping them from wrinkling. And it also can be archival. So if this is something that you want to hold on to forever and ever and want to help keep it from yellowing, or if you've invested in archival paper, then you probably should also invest in archival glue. I have not, and sticking to the theme of using what I have in my house, I'm using Elmer's glue. And I went ahead and made myself a glue sponge, partly because it's easier for this project, and the other part is because my Elmer's glue is actually in a huge like gallon jug, not those little individual pieces. If you want to make yourself a glue sponge, Just get yourself a Tupperware container, a sponge, just like regular old kitchen sponge is fine. Put the sponge in there. Dump a bunch of Elmer's glue. For the first time, let it sit like overnight so it can all soak up. And after that, it's fine. So I'm going to show you how I'm using this and how we're connecting the pages. And then you can pick what type of glue you have around and what works best for you. The other thing, which I'm seeing, I don't know where it went. There it is. So the other thing once I start gluing that I like to have around is a rag, just in case I get some glue on my fingers, and it allows you to wipe things off a little bit. So time to start connecting our pages. So the first thing that is the easiest, I'm going to grab a stack. You want to make sure, I mean, you don't have to, but I think this is the easiest. So for mine, since I ripped them, the one side has a different edge than the rest. I want all of the ripped edges to line up, so I'm going to put that at the top. All the folded sides, the crease on one side, it just makes it easier as you're going through the process, connecting, making sure that you're not messing it up. So we're going to take our first 2 folios, and if you open up the top one and then open up your back one, you're going to be connecting those 2 middle pages to each other. So I'm going to pick up my first connector and go ahead, and I'm just laying this down on top of my glue sponge, poking it a little bit. I have a wooden coffee stirrer just to help me pull it out without getting glue all over my fingers. And now what we're going to do is lay this on top, kind of lining up where the fold is. Lay it on the other and fold over the edge. So it's now connecting these 2 pages. To try and make sure that it's really well connected, and it helps if you're using Elmer's glue to not have those wrinkles, I take my rag, especially if it doesn't look like it's going down everywhere, and just rub over top. That way, if a little bit of extra glue happens to squirt out or anything like that, the rag gets it and it keeps it from being messy. So now we're just going to continue to add 1 folio at a time. You do want to take your time with this and keep checking, making sure that things are staying, that they're staying lined up so that it doesn't get really, really wonky. As you'll see, I can flip it over and check the back and work on pushing it to make sure my pages are nice and close together. That helps to make sure that everything is going to stay aligned. So you're going to continue to connect your pages, and you should see you're starting to get a long accordion, and you want to continue to connect your pages until it is as thick as you want it to be.
Okay.
So I've decided this seems like a good size to me. So I'm going to stop connecting pages. If you've done this right, you should now have a super long, wonderful, beautiful accordion. And now we get to make the cover.